Hello and welcome to our Unit 12. This is our first installment. We're going to talk about biological productivity this time, and then we'll talk about energy transfer. First, we got to produce it before we can move it around. I've shown a picture like this before. We talked about El Nino. We talked about chlorophyll A, the green pigment produced by mostly algae. And if you take a look at maximum colors and minimum colors, if you take a look at it, we've got coastal areas which are actually looking kind of dim, and we have polar areas where we actually are looking kind of max. And if you take a look at the open ocean, it's actually probably some of the worst because populations of phytoplankton and zooplankton, the immatures, which are pretty much everywhere in the ocean, are going to be out there, and if there were any nutrients in this water, it's very quickly taken out. It's not being replenished by upwelling or coastal erosion or anything else. And then right along the coast, you actually get, especially where big rivers pop out, like you see there or there, or if we just get regular upwelling where the winds are actually blowing so that they're moving water off to the right, and actually bringing colder nutrient-rich water from the bottom of the ocean up towards the crust. But this is what we're going to talk about, is the biological productivity. Photosynthetic critters are probably the first level of biological productivity because they're able to get their energy from something that's not alive. They get it from sunlight, and they're going to take carbon dioxide, 6 carbon dioxide molecules. They're going to combine it with 6 water molecules with light energy and produce one C6H12O6, one glucose molecule, which is the energy for life, plus 6 oxygen molecules, which of course we need for cellular respiration. The way it actually works is there's light and dark reactions, or light and Kelvin cycle. What it does, it takes the light in and water to produce the oxygen, and then produces ATP, adenosine triphosphate, and NADPH, which is going to actually power the Kelvin cycle. And then as the Kelvin cycle pulls in carbon dioxide, it crunches out the sugar, and then also produces ADP, adenosine diphosphate, and NADP, which is an ion that comes back into the chlorophyll with sunlight and water, produces more ATP. So we actually do get oxygen and sugar, glucose, from the process of photosynthesis. We have what's called gross primary production. This is when the plant's actually producing oxygen. And the plant produces oxygen for itself, but it produces so much oxygen that other life can benefit, and that's what the net productivity is that some of the oxygen goes back into the plant, but some of it stays in the atmosphere. And then respiration, it pulls in the oxygen and the sugar, which is already in the leaves, to produce carbon dioxide and water. And it does this during the dark. Kelvin cycle can happen 24 hours a day. This can only happen in daylight, so they're actually showing you a darker sky, so it pulls in the oxygen, so it can actually do cellular respiration. We also have net production, where life can produce things, and then we have regenerated production, where life can change those things into other things. And biological production can take in nitrous, this slipped my mind, but pull in this nitrogen, oxygen. It's not nitrous, it's I can't remember what O3 is. Pulls in this material into biological production and produces ammonia, and that can be regenerated back into the biological process to actually produce ammonia. And then ammonia can actually be in deep water, and it can turn back into this nitrous oxide. It's not nitrous oxide, but it's going to produce this material, which will go back through. Nitrogen is a very important molecule for making DNA and RNA, so biological production needs nitrogen. Photosynthetic world again, taking a look at very prime areas and very negative areas. The gyres out in the middle of the ocean are very much like a desert. Even though it's in an aquatic environment, the nutrients are not there for life. The way we measure all this stuff is we can use a plankton net to actually see plankton populations. So a very large open ring pulled by a boat through the water with a net small enough to trap all biologic material, and it actually collects into a sample bottle way in the back, and we pull this for a mile or 10 miles or 100 feet or whatever we want to do to sample the plankton. We can also use the grand method where we actually drop a long line down with bottles. We have clear bottles on one side for sunlight, and we have dark bottles on the other side to see what the control is. And what we notice in the control is that with no sunlight, there's no we have lots of respiration, so the oxygen that was in the water gets lost. No production of oxygen, no production of glucose. And in the clear container, we do get some sunlight up here towards the surface, and we see we get an oxygen gain. And as we get lower and lower in the water, the light gets less and less, and we get a lower gain of oxygen. And then we get down to the aphotic level where the light doesn't get through, and then the clear bottles are just the same as the dark bottles. They actually go into oxygen deficiency and eventually get to the same level as what it did if it was in a dark bottle. We can also use chlorophyll levels, looking at satellite, looking at chlorophyll A particularly, which I showed you in a couple maps when we did the El Nino examples back when we were talking about currents. Nutrients available, we need nitrate, that's what that was. We need nitrate, we need phosphorus, we need iron, we need silica, and the best way to get it is upwelling, where we get wind blowing across the surface and we actually pull up water from below. All the dead creatures that were up here sink down there and all the nutrients get recycled. Main source of these materials is rivers, runoff, so coastal waters tend to be higher productivity than non-coastal waters. And to give you some idea of how much material or biologic material there actually is in water, this is a picture I'm going to show you a little later in this section with red tide and toxins and oxygen deficiencies, but these are all dead fish that used to be in the water around here, which you didn't see, and now you actually see them belly up, that light color, which we'll talk a little bit about when we actually talk about design of life. Solar radiation, very important for photosynthesis. Where the Earth actually points towards the sun, we get very high concentrations of sunlight. Where it doesn't, we get lower concentrations. In fact, up here at the top and the bottom, we get almost no sunlight, very dim sunlight. And of course that changes with seasons. This is our winter, where we're facing away from the sun. The sun's actually hitting down directly at the Tropic of Capricorn, and then 6 months later it's at the Tropic of Cancer. And we have our summer, they have their winter, and you can see the light is not just in terms of latitude, it's also in terms of season, it's also time of day. 12 noon, higher sunlight than 12 midnight, and it gives rise to the euphotic zone, which is the area of the ocean that actually gets sunlight. And then it keeps going down, less and less sunlight, until we get to the aphotic zone where there is no sunlight. Insolation and latitude. If you take a look at the blue line is actually representing winter solstice, when the sun is lowest in our sky, and you notice the southern hemisphere gets the most amount of sunlight. Up by the poles, where they get 24 hours of sunlight, get the most, and then as you get closer and closer to the equator, sunlight gets less and less and less, and then crosses down, say median, and then actually for the northern hemisphere we get less and less sunlight. We're located about right here, so we don't get much sunlight during the winter solstice, and the North Pole doesn't get any. And then you look at the flip side for the summer solstice. South Pole doesn't get any sunlight. It goes back up and gets the same amount for 39 degrees, 38 degrees south latitude that we got for 39 degrees north latitude. This is the average annual solar radiation, and you can see the poles get less than the equator. And if you actually look at these two lines, even during the winter solstice and the summer solstice and everywhere in between, by the equator it's almost the same amount. It's almost 12 hours of daylight and 12 hours of night every single day. Light in the ocean, solar radiation peaks in the visible. Same with our eyes. Our atmosphere does a really good job of letting visible light in and trapping the rest of these things and sending them back out. Shorter wavelengths, violet, blue, and green, penetrate the deepest in the ocean. The reds, the yellows, and the purples, we actually see that they don't penetrate as deep as the blue light, which can go down all the way down to the bottom of the photic zone, and all the way down to where we actually do not have any more light. If we go to coastal waters, we actually get more plankton. Plankton will absorb the light, so the light penetration doesn't go down as deep, and you actually see that it's more in the green and the yellow, which are the colors that plants like. Color related to turbidity and photosynthetic pigments. Photosynthetic organisms in the ocean, we have a lot of different things. We have the microscopic plankton, which apparently we're not going to talk about in this section, but we have the spermatophytes, which are the sort of lichen-looking red things that are in the water. They're usually in shallower water. They can also be made out of eelgrass and some mangrove material. This is eelgrass over here. And then we also have macroscopic algae you can see with your eye, primarily kelp, which are usually in shallow water. They're usually affixed with a holdfast down at the bottom so that the waves don't beat them to death and drive them either inland or back out in the ocean. And they do come in lots of different flavors. They got brown, green, and red, but macroscopic algae. Microscopic, okay, here we go, microscopic algae. We have two different varieties. Remember we talked about sediments, we talked about ooze. Diatoms are the siliceous ooze, and coccolithophores are the calcareous oozes. Anytime the sediment is more than 30% this material, it is called an ooze. Diatoms, really good. If you take a look at them, they're very good for passing water. We use them in filters. You can also buy it to put into like bread and things. It's a good scour of our digestive system. These are the White Cliffs of Dover, which are just like layer after layer after layer after layer of dead diatomaceous critters. Coccolithophores can also be used for filters. You can see the water can go through and it actually traps very small things. It's also a material that we use for creating tums. If you actually could look at a tums through a microscope, you'd actually start seeing these little spheres, or at least parts of these spheres. But these are the microscopic plankton that dominate the ocean: diatoms, and coccolithophores. And dinoflagellates, these are the things that actually cause that fish kill. They cause red tides. They'll turn the water red. They're harmful algae blooms because they have toxins. You can see them here off the coastline. These are red tides. The darker blacks are the deeper reds, and they can actually give rise to warnings. You can see we actually have a Florida red tide present. Naturally occurring, may cause irritation, coughing and sneezing, respiratory conditions can make those worse. And then don't harvest anything that filters the water like shellfish or mollusks. You probably also don't want to eat the fish. But dinoflagellates, which cause the red tides, toxins. Also, the amount of material that's in there, for whatever reason, these things just bloom. It takes up a lot of the nutrients, and as soon as the nutrients are gone, they die. Bacteria moves in. They actually decompose the material using oxygen, and they can oxygen deplete the water, which is a very bad thing for fish, and that causes a lot of the fish kill. It's not just the toxins, it's also the depreciation of the oxygen levels. And the last slide we're going to do here is regional productivity. If you take a look at January through December, so we got the months there, we have increases. We have winter, spring, summer, and fall. So in the winter in January, we have very low diatoms, the plankton, and we have even lower zooplankton, the animal plankton. So we got the plant plankton in the dark line, and we have the animal plankton in the dashed line. And as the winter actually wanes, as we move into the spring, you see the light increases and the diatoms actually start increasing. And as they increase, the animals that eat them increase. Now both of these are plankton for small fish. They don't really differentiate between animal and plant. So we have mostly small fish or omnivores. But as we see go through the spring, the nutrient levels start dropping, and the plant plankton, the diatom mass goes down, and soon after that the zooplankton, like early mid-summer, that number starts going back down, and then by the fall it actually drops down below the plant plankton, the diatom mass again. Polar oceans limited primarily by sunlight, so you're going to see even a lesser effect. There is no thermocline, so we do get good mixing, and we do have lots of these creatures that can live in cooler water, so we do get these polar waters as being fairly productive, and it allows vertical mixing of this upwelling. During tropical oceans, we get a very good thermocline, which keeps the colder water away from the warmer water. During mid-latitudes, it gets a little less, although and then we have a winter-summer up there. During the equator, it's almost always warm at the top and almost always cold below. During our winter, the thermocline gets less, allows more upwelling, and then if you go up to the poles, you notice that there's almost no thermocline whatsoever, and cold water can make it all the way up to the surface, so nutrient-rich water can go up. So polar waters tend to be more productive than any place else. And that's the end of the slides. I appreciate you stopping by. Thank you.